Hello and welcome to a live deprogram with Keri Smith. I am your host, Keri. Today is Monday, September 8th. I hope you had a good weekend and I hope you can hear me. I hope all my microphone troubles are over. Let me know in the chat if there's any sound problems and thank you in advance. Danielle, did YouTube censor this one too? No, hopefully not yet. What they're talking about is the subject of today's video is a really horrific story. It's a horrific murder that happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. It happened back last month, at the end of this past month on August 22nd. And the reason it became a news story was that the local transit system where the murder happened, it happened on the light rail in Charlotte. The local system there, CATS, they released a video of the stabbing, of the murder, and they released that this past Friday. And if you haven't heard about it yet, it's no surprise, because what's fascinating about the media coverage following this gruesome murder is that there was no media coverage at first. The only reason it is now being talked about and reported in Newsweek today and other places today is because of the stink that people raised online, that citizens raised online, that people raised on social media to eventually get it to the attention of people with higher platforms who raised the stink about it. The mainstream media has been attempting, is still, in my opinion, partially attempting a media blackout about this story. They don't like the optics of this story. It doesn't fit the narrative that they like to sell. And I have some thoughts about that we can get into in a bit. But if you didn't hear about it, I'm not surprised, because you're not supposed to hear about it. In fact, the mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, released her own statement on X over the weekend, essentially saying, don't share this story. And we're going to take a look at that as well. Yes, Davina, it's definitely a blackout. And hey, guys, I see some familiar faces here. And so the other thing is that a weird thing happened to me personally this morning promoting today's show. And I guess some people have seen that already. Let me just show you this. This reminds me of the Biden COVID years. This is flashbacks to all the censorship that was happening online during those years on Twitter and Facebook. I know many of you also had this happen to you, where posts were removed constantly. You were getting strikes constantly. They were punishing you as a social media user and saying your post would not reach as many people. They kept changing their TOS. I had it to where they changed their TOS to say, we will be removing things, even if they're factual, if they might cause vaccine hesitancy. That was the big TOS change. There were lots of changes, but that was the change that really blew my mind, because they took down a scientific study that I shared. They took it down, even though it's a study, even though it's science, even though these are facts for people to read and form their own opinions. They took it down because it might cause vaccine hesitancy, right? They were being moral, ethical arbiters of what truth is. They're being arbiters of truth, and bad ones at that. And so today, Facebook censored again, and it reminded me of the Biden COVID years. It's kind of interesting, because I was trying to put up the thumbnail for today's episode, which you can kind of see it grayed out there in the background. Let me put this on the screen. And it says media blackout. But then in front of it, you can see a little pop-up on Facebook that says, this post or object that you were commenting on has been removed by its owner and can no longer be commented on. Because what I usually do now is I put the thumbnail up and then I put in a comment with the link, because that gets around. If you put the link right in the post, that immediately means the algorithm's not going to show it to most people, because there's a link there. They don't like links that take you off of the platform, right? So I usually put the link in a comment. Anyway, I tried to go put the link in the comment and it was immediately deleted. And I was getting this pop-up, and they did this 5 times in a row. And I was thinking, okay, maybe this is crazy. They're blacking out this story even on Facebook. It's kind of funny, because I'm here to talk about a media blackout and they're not allowing you to post about it. But then I thought, well, maybe it's some of the words. Maybe they have the algorithm changed already to censor some of the words, like maybe her name, the name of the victim, or the name of the perpetrator, or something about a murder. Who knows what combination of words. So I took all the words out and was just posting the image, And Facebook continued to play this game with me and delete it. Somebody asked, for anyone who's curious, they did not give me any notifications about the deletions. There's no official record that they deleted this. That's why I started taking screenshots eventually. I would just get the pop-up and it would be gone, and it would say it was deleted by the owner, who's me. So that's not true. And somebody who posts a lot on Facebook and has a pretty large platform was asking, the details of it. What do you think? Do you think, how did you get a notice about it? No, I didn't get a notice about it. And my best guess, I actually got the sense that there was a real Facebook employee on the other side just playing games with me. That's the sense I got. Because if the algorithm had been tweaked to censor out this story, then my old post on Friday about what happened would have been deleted, and that's still up. I presume that would have been deleted. I feel like there was someone manually there just playing games with me. Some jerk at Facebook. I know woke people who've worked for Facebook, who've worked for Google, who've worked for these places. They do stuff like this. They have their company has no scruples. You think the individual employees do? No. So I don't know what the circumstances are, why it was being pulled down, but that was just my best guess, was there's some jokester there. So I kept getting this, deletion on Facebook, and that was just a flashback to the COVID censorship, the Biden censorship years. I know Zuckerberg has since come out, testified before Congress. We all know this, right? He said he admitted to everything we knew, everything we had been saying was going on for years, and they kept denying. He admitted to it before Congress and said, yes, Biden's administration, the government basically coerced them into doing that, into censoring and deplatforming people, and that he regretted it. Come on. They haven't changed that much. Come on. So that's just getting into a little background on trying to even let people know about the show today. So, as I mentioned, since people online were sharing this story and talking about it and pointing out the double standard from the media, there has since been, well, let me show you this first. This was yesterday. Liz Wheeler shared this on the New York Times. She went to the New York Times and just did a quick search for the name of the victim, Iryna Zarutska. 0 results. They had not even reported on it by yesterday evening. And she did a quick little recap. Look, George Floyd returns over 5,000 results. Trayvon Martin over 1,000 results. Kilmar Abrego Garcia 56 results. Daniel Penny. Remember Daniel Penny? That's his case is somewhat relevant, given that this was on a train, and Daniel Penny was mentioned 100 times. Iryna Zarutska 0 times, and then she said New York Times is propaganda. They were trying to do this media blackout. Then, when they finally started reporting on it, one of the first ones to break the silence was Axios. And look how they framed it. Joel Berry over at Babylon Bee, he shared this headline from Axios. You can find this if you go look it up on Axios. I was just looking at it. This is how they framed it. This is the first time they're reporting on this murder that was captured on film. And instead of just giving us the facts, they have to take a swipe at MAGA and Trump in their headline. This is the first reporting on it, and they have to take a swipe. They have to try and solidify, how are we, now that we are forced to recognize that this murder happened and that people are aware of it, how are we going to frame it within our current narrative? Let's take a swipe at MAGA in the headline. Grisly Charlotte stabbing video fuels MAGA's crime message. And you can imagine what the article's like. If we have time, we'll go through it. But, it's not really a reporting about the murder itself or about crime in Charlotte. It's an article about let's try and use this murder to crap on MAGA. Okay. That's how Axios decided to report on it. So Newsweek actually did do an article. They did 2 articles this morning. Yeah, what the frig, says Gunner. That's exactly. They finally cover it, and they cover it with a swipe on MAGA. So Newsweek finally decided to cover it. I think this is another social media success in that people raised a big enough stink over the weekend and on Friday that they were unable to ignore it anymore, and so they had to cover it. And so this is the video. Now, there's no sound on this. I'm just going to play, and don't worry, it doesn't actually show it. This just shows the moments before the murder. It's going to cut off, and you're not going to see the brutal murder. I would not show this here, even if it didn't cut off. I wouldn't show that. But you're going to see the minutes that were leading up to it. Now, the victim here is a refugee who fled the Ukraine with her mother in 2022 and has been living in Charlotte, North Carolina. Can you imagine just her mom, like the family, like you're fleeing a country looking for a safer place, and you come to North Carolina, and she was a waitress from what I've read. She was getting off work at a restaurant, a pizza restaurant, I think. She has a baseball cap on. You can see her getting on the train here, and she's got her earbuds in. It's a great lesson in having situational awareness when you're out in public, because this poor girl never saw this coming. This is the video. And you can see her take a seat there. The perpetrator, his name is Decarlos Brown. He's seated behind her. And within 4 minutes there, he just took out a pocket knife. And then he stands up and just stabs her to death. Now, there's more footage of him, of the moments after the murder when he's walking through the train. And at first, the other people didn't even notice something had happened in the other part of the train. You can see him walk by some guys, but they start to notice something had happened because of there's blood dripping everywhere from him. And then he gets off at the next stop, and they've since apprehended him. And here's the thing. This is another aspect of why am I covering this? There's lots of murders. Why cover this murder, right? Number one, because the media was trying to bury it. That's why, because they're doing a media blackout. You know, I still haven't done an episode about the latest trans killer who went into a Catholic church or outside of a Catholic church and killed little kids. I still haven't done a video about that because even though I have a lot of thoughts about it, I've written a little bit about it. I've written a lot in my journal about it. I was just thinking a lot about that murder, but I haven't done a video about it because it wasn't this sense of urgency of like, they weren't allowed to memory hole that one. That one got huge attention until they realized it was a trans person. And then of course they try to dial it back a little bit because it doesn't fit the narrative that they like. But that one was out there. This one, they were trying to bury this, which is infuriating. And so that's one reason. The other reason is because this goes back to this crime problem that we have in the big cities, and leftists, these Democrat-run cities who want to stick their head in the sand and pretend like there's no crime problem if it doesn't fit their racial optics, if they don't like the optics. This killer, Decarlos Brown, had already been arrested and released 14 times. Okay, like 14 times. I think in total he has served 4 to 6 years. One of the last times he got released, he assaulted his sister within a couple of months of having been released. He's what is known as a career criminal. This is someone who has been in and out, you know, for violent crimes as well, for armed robbery, things like this. So why is it that why are we putting up with this in cities? I guess for those who live in cities, like, why are you putting up with this? Where someone can just continue offending. Look at this. This is a system failure. That's why this is also of interest. This is a cultural, civilizational kind of failure, and you're seeing it in lots of cities. Here's all the 14 mugshots from all the different times he was arrested. They know this guy has a history of violence. Why is he on the streets? Why don't we have stiffer penalties for repeat offenders? Longer sentences? Why is it that, because some people are saying, well, he's schizophrenic, he has mental illness. Maybe we should rethink this trend, this movement that started in the 1970s, where we started getting rid of the mental institutions. And there was this whole movement to protect at any cost the violent offenders, to care about their feelings, to care about not offending, to set up society to cater to them, but not to the law-abiding taxpayers or the citizens, not to cater to them. Why have we shut down all the insane asylums? They were considered, they weren't compassionate enough. Why are we institutionalizing people? This is a movement that started in the 70s, and I think we're far enough out now. We're 50 years out now. You can look and say, hey, this has been a failure. Some people should be institutionalized for life. Some people are a danger to society. They've lost the right to intermingle in polite society, in civil society. They're a threat to the average citizen, to public safety. So they've given up that right by virtue of their behavior. But he was out. Yeah, bring back asylums. I see that in the chat. Bring back asylums. He was out and just allowed to wander. And get this. This is personal for me. I see some people in the chat who are from this area or near this area, and I feel you, because this is the largest, this is the closest major city to where I'm from, to where I grew up. I'm a Texan now, proud. My husband's from Texas. I've fully assimilated in Texas pride, but I'm from South Carolina. I went to school in North Carolina. And where I'm from in South Carolina is an hour from Charlotte. It's an hour from here. It's still that's the hub we fly into if we go home to visit. And to see what's happened to that city over time, over the decades, it's starting to look more, it reminds me more of Durham, which is completely in decline, Durham, North Carolina, where I went to college. It reminds me of Durham. It reminds me of Austin and what's happened on 6th Street and the total decline that we see there. It reminds me of Skid Row in Los Angeles. Violent crime is increasing. Longtime residents are fleeing the city. And do you know who's coming to the city? Transients, criminals. And what's the mayor's response? This is just salt in the wound. She had to issue a response. And so this is what she chose to say. This is Charlotte Mayor V. Lyles. She says the video of the heartbreaking attack that took Iryna Zarutska's life is now public. I want to thank our media partners and community members who have chosen not to repost or share the footage out of respect for Iryna's family. Is that what it is? It's respect for her family. I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes maybe that's really, but I don't think that's the primary motivation. I think the primary motivation is you don't want the story out there. And so you're kind of scolding people here for sharing it. And then she continues, this was a senseless and tragic loss. My prayers remain with her loved ones as they continue to grieve through an unimaginable time. Like so many of you, I am heartbroken, and I've been thinking hard about what safety really looks like in our city. This part is just nonsense. This is what we get when we elect woke, honestly, this NPR mommy kind of way of speaking, this affect of I've been thinking, what Josh Slocum on Disaffected calls the kindergartner teacher voice, the kindergarten teacher voice, I've been thinking really hard about what safety really looks like in our city. Have you? You're the mayor. Have you been thinking hard about it? Based on all of your focus, your attention, your money that you've been pouring into equity, which I'm about to bring up the website for Charlotte, You can see what she's been thinking a lot about, and it's equity. It's not safety, but she's been thinking really hard about safety now and what it really looks like in our city. I remain committed to doing all we can to protect our residents and ensure Charlotte is a place where everyone feels safe. Forgive me for not buying this crap. This is from the mayor's. This is from her equity, clt.org. This is where your taxpayer money is been going under this mayor. By the way, I think she's on her 5th term. Is that right? Somebody in Charlotte, correct me if I'm wrong. When she's up for re-election, I hope you make a change if you do care about the safety of the city and where the city's heading. Otherwise, you're going to end up another San Francisco, another Los Angeles, another Chicago, another what Austin's becoming. Yeah, she got crazy ratioed, Lily. Thankfully, there were people just calling her to the carpet. This is her Equity CLT website. It's CLT, the mayor's racial equity initiative. A public-private partnership for an equitable Charlotte. A public-private partnership. This is what James Lindsay pointed out. This is the stakeholder economy. That's what this is. And I had a Facebook friend who said, "Oh, so fascism." Yes, actually, private, like the private corporations and government entities merging together to push collectivism and to suppress individual liberty and individual rights. Yeah, pretty much. A public-private partnership. Here she is in her pink. Mayor V. Lyles has a bold vision for Charlotte to set the standard as an American city for achieving racial equity, social justice. They just say it. They're not embarrassed of it. I mean, for a while, the wokies were embarrassed of social justice. Racial equity, social justice, economic opportunity, and upward mobility through transformational public-private partnerships. The initiative strikes to provide solutions-driven, measurable strategies that produce equitable access, opportunities, and treatment and outcomes for Charlotte's communities of color. You've got a whole website here pushing, you know what this is? Racism. Public and private partnerships for racism in our city. That's what this is. That's what you're pushing. Bridge the digital divide. This is all the different focus areas. By the way, she's trying to raise $500 million for this. She's already raised millions upon millions. Bridge the digital divide. Create the Center for Digital Equity. And provide devices, internet access, and digital literacy. That's where they tell you what to think and how to think. That's where they give you the narratives, right? The woke narratives. Digital literacy education in vulnerable communities. Vulnerable. We know what that means in woke speak. That means money, resources, time spent on, based on race and sexuality and sex and all these different identity groups that they claim are oppressed. Focus area 2, invest in corridors of opportunity, improve access to employment, mobility options, housing, and daily services in 6 business and neighborhood corridors of opportunity. So taking taxpayer funds and creating housing for, it's just spending more money from the taxpayers is what it is. Taking from some, giving to others. Number 3, transform Johnson C. Smith University for the future. Position JCSU as a top-tier, career path-oriented, historic Black college by growing the university's academic offerings, recruiting top talent through career-oriented incentives, and appointing a transformation leader that will champion positive change at this university that's just for Black people. Okay. Catalyze employer commitment. Advance more Black and brown leaders in C-suite positions and on boards, and develop career paths for students and workforce development programs, and extend corporate policies for equity. This is all racism. And if you look at some of her exciting updates, in the past few years since she's been pushing this. You've got this is from 2021 when she launched this, a new $250 million community-wide public-private partnership to advance racial equity in Charlotte was announced Monday. Racial equity in Charlotte. This is what she's spending the taxpayer money and time on. Newly announced mayor's racial equity initiative seeks to raise $250 million to address inequities and boost opportunity. Racial equity. They clarify here in the description. Barings, Coca-Cola. Here are some of the private partnerships, the corporations that are on board with this Marxism, this identity Marxism. Barings, Coca-Cola, Consolidated, and Nucor Corporation commit a combined $3.7 million to the Charlotte Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative. That was in 2022. Here's some more of her news updates. Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative celebrates its 1-year anniversary. The goal for Charlotte to set the standard as an American city where racial equity, social justice, and economic opportunity and upward mobility can be achieved through transformational public and private partnerships. Then in December 2022, by that time, they're advertising new donations. New donations push Mayor's Racial Equity Initiative past $150 million private sector fundraising goal. So they've got other corporations, Honeywell, Albemarle, and other anonymous contributors. Honeywell contributed. And then they have a little thing in 2023 talking about how their momentum is continuing. So this is what the mayor of Charlotte has been spending her time on. Equity, woke, racism, anti-constitutional garbage. Jim T. Charlotte wants to be the Chicago of the South. They should just put that on the website, right? We want to be the Chicago of the South. Lindsay says the WEF jargon is painfully obvious. I'm willing to bet the mayor is a cabinet member. And you got this right. Oceana says DEI ultimately isn't about race. It's about an ideological funnel. So all leadership think identically so much for diversity. It's true. This is a point that's sometimes hard to explain. Everything they do is centered around identity, race, sex, sexuality. But at the end of the day, that's just the vehicle for Marxism and communism. That's just the Trojan horse they are using this time. At the end of the day, like you said, it's really about the identity. What's inside that Trojan horse? It's about the ideology that they're smuggling in. That's what it is. Thank you for the super chat, Gunner, for 59 NOK. Getting rid of the institutions was actually an additional abuse against some of the people who lived in them and had a better life there. That's true. A lot of the people that they put on the streets who needed help. So that's the mayor's response. And as people pointed out, she has been, here, let me just show you. Yeah. Thankfully, people did not take kindly to it. This was my response to her, was why not spend all the time and money you're wasting on commie equity programs on justice reform and public safety instead? So I had something there from her site, but Not the Bee says, quote, I've been thinking hard about what safety really looks like in our city is one of the most brain dead political nothing burgers I've ever heard from any official following a tragedy. You don't know what to say because your party doesn't allow you to acknowledge the truth. So sad. True. Megan Basham said, instead of keeping your constituents safe, this has been your priority. And now we see the results, a homicide rate that jumped 40% last year. And she just highlighted the fact that they're spending all this time on it's a news article about the Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice in North Carolina. So it goes on and on. This is my friend, Deb Fellman, who I've had on the show several times, to talk about education advocacy and homeschooling. Alavithina there, she says you could start by cutting the BS that we can't arrest our way out of this. Oh, that's yes. Let me show you this. So one of her initial statements, it wasn't in the tweet there, but one of her initial statements was, we cannot arrest our way out of crime. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad I looked at some of those comments because I had forgotten to bookmark this. Hold on. She says we can't arrest our way out of crime and mental illness. Yeah, here we go. This is from a local news station there. Charlotte mayor faces criticism over comments on Ukrainian refugees' fatal stabbing. This is from the press conference. So before she put out that Twitter statement, after the death, so Iryna was killed on August 22nd. On August 29th, she gave a local press conference, the mayor did, before the video footage came out. She gave a press conference. This is her at that press conference. And at that press conference, she said that he had okay, so Lyle said that Brown Jr., so the perpetrator, had struggled with mental health issues and looked like he had, quote, suffered a crisis, end quote. He looks like he suffered a crisis, without noting the suspect's criminal history, including murder charges. And she said that this part, we can't arrest our way out of this. She says, the Democratic mayor continued, saying that mental health problems, quote, must be treated with the same compassion, diligence, and commitment as cancer or heart disease. Her whole statement was about how we treat the mental health of people like this murderer who stood up unprovoked with a pocket knife and brutally stabbed this woman on her way home from work. She said, we must treat this mental illness. We must treat mental illness with the same compassion, diligence, and commitment as cancer or heart disease. Then they're talking about her Twitter statement. But I wish this one had the full original comments. I want to find those because she said we cannot arrest our way out of crime. Here we go. This is it. Unbelievable. Can you see this article? I'll make it bigger, but I'll just read it for you. Lyles said that the suspect appeared to have struggled with mental health and suffered a crisis. She said Charlotte and its transit system are by and large safe. By and large safe. But the incident highlights the need for stronger support systems, okay? Not enforcement of, but support systems. And what kind of support? Mental health. She says, quote, we will never arrest our way out of issues such as homelessness and mental health. Mental health disease is just that, a disease like any other that needs to be treated with the same compassion, diligence, and commitment as cancer or heart disease. Lyle added that people living on the streets are more often the victims of crime than the perpetrators, and said she's committed to working with county officials, healthcare providers, and community leaders to improve services. None of this was about crime. None of this was about the murder. None of this was about, how about, first of all, we can't arrest our way out of this problem. It's this guy was arrested 14 times. The cops did their job. The system didn't. The DA didn't. You didn't, Mayor. I don't think the problem is with the arresting. I think the problem is with the releasing. We can't arrest our way out of this problem. And then she says we need to have compassion for these people. And it's like, but what about, at what point are you, as an elected official, going to have compassion for the tax-paying, law-abiding citizens in Charlotte? When are you going to have compassion for them? That part was just so, I'm glad that I was reminded of that, because that part was so just tone deaf. And then this is the governor of North Carolina, Governor Josh Stein. I am heartbroken for the family of Iryna Zarutska, who lost their loved one to this senseless act of violence, and I'm appalled by the footage of her murder. We need more cops on the beat to keep people safe. Okay, I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to, instead of defunding the police, giving more resources to police. But that's not all. The buck doesn't stop with the cops. That's what he's kind of doing here, is saying this was a cop issue. We need more cops on the beat to keep people safe. That's why my budget calls for more funding to hire more well-trained police officers. I call upon the legislature to pass my law enforcement recruitment and retention package to address vacancies in our state and local agencies so they can stop these horrific crimes and hold violent criminals accountable. What's he missing there? He's kind of missing that the problem is that your penalties are not harsh or stiff enough, that a guy like this, a career criminal who's been arrested for violent crime 18 times, was even out on the streets in the first place. Somebody did a community note saying Decarlos Brown was arrested 14 times and was diagnosed as a schizophrenic. And some of these comments were great. I'm going to show a few of them. Will Chamberlain, he highlighted the 14 different arrest mugshots for Decarlos Brown. He said, "What on earth are you talking about, Governor? Decarlos Brown was arrested 14 times. The police did their job. It's your job to sign into law bills that keep career criminals in jail. How about take some responsibility for it, Governor? Your whole post is just about cops. We need more well-trained cops. I don't disagree with you. Let's have more well-trained cops. But what about your part of what's going on?" And then this one really called him to the carpet. Megan Basham again. She's great. She said, "Governor, your task force for racial equity and criminal justice specifically called for increasing pre-trial release and decriminalizing public behavior, meaning homelessness and being a public nuisance. Both of these policies contributed to Decarlos Brown even being on the streets and having the opportunity to commit murder on the Charlotte light rail. Are you going to roll back these policies that your racial task force initiated that are making North Carolinians unsafe?" His task force did this, called for increasing pre-trial release, like letting people out before trial, and decriminalizing public behavior, meaning homelessness and being a public nuisance. Do you know Austin did this for a while? Back when I was working on South Congress, which is a very popular part of Austin, and in the past few years, with the reimagining, the decline of Austin in the past few years, quite honestly, South Congress has become completely redone. They've taken out almost everything that made it unique, and they've added all of this corporate, very rich crap. Like they have all these chain stores. Kate Spade, is that her name? I don't know. They have all these different chain stores, and it's basically like Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills now. It's just gross to me. But then if you go down to 6th Street in Austin, it's like Skid Row in LA. So you've got these two extremes. You've got this ultra wealthy area, and you've got this impoverished area, and where you see all the crime. In like 6th Street, a lot of the businesses were closed down for COVID and never reopened. A lot of the historic businesses, like the Alamo, Buffalo Billiards, went under. There's broken windows. There's graffiti and spray paint about how Black Lives Matter. And there's like drug addicts and homeless people passed out all over the street at all times of the day, which looks a lot like Skid Row to me. But for a while, at least Austin got rid of their camping proposition. They passed this proposition for a while, all the leftists in Austin. And when I was working, this was back in 2017, 2018, around that time, before COVID, I was working down on South Congress at my friend's boot shop. And because of this bill, there would be homeless people just could camp out wherever they wanted to. It was like this. It was like, let's decriminalize public nuisance behavior. Let's decriminalize homeless encampments. And so they were cropping up everywhere. And in fact, homeless people were flocking to Austin from other places. And small town mayors, from what we heard, they were putting homeless people on the train to come to Austin. It's like, okay, good, go there. And so I remember coming into work one day, and this became like a regular problem of them just encamped in front of the small businesses, the mom and pop businesses. There was, first of all, human defecation right in front of our doorway that we had to clean up. And the person who did it, the homeless guy who did it, sleeping right there in front of our storefront. And I called the police. We had to call the police. They came. They said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can really do. Not anymore. Not with that proposition that was passed." And so eventually Austin voted to reverse this, and the leftist protests, they were all angry that it was being reversed, but Austin came to their senses, I think, at some point. We're like, oh, this has gone too far. But that's what Megan Basham is talking about here. This governor decriminalized public behavior, which has led to this. Where's the compassion for families and little kids who have to walk and step over drug addicts who are passed out in the street with needles, like in San Francisco and other places that have done? Like, where's the compassion for the families like that are being pushed out of the city, that are having to move away because you don't care about when they go out into public, when law-abiding citizens go out into public, having to encounter dangerous, psychotic people and people who are on drugs who are defecating on the sidewalk and setting up camp on the side. Like, where's the compassion for everyday people? I don't see it in these statements from the public officials. It's pretty frustrating. I sometimes, before I do a show, I will try and think about leftists. Like, if a leftist is watching, how do I get them to listen? How do I get them to pay attention or hear what I'm saying and understand? Because they have, when they're in that cult, they have so many psychological barriers to even having dialogue. Everything in that cult tells them not to talk with you. They have a stereotype about you. They will come into your comments and they will just leave. They will let you know. They reveal their cult thinking in your comments. Like, when they do a lot of times talk to you, they'll spew a bunch of stuff that you don't even believe. They're like, oh, well, I guess you think blah, 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 blah. It's like, no. Who are you talking to? But they're told, they create this avatar of what you are that prevents them from actually listening to you. So a lot of times I'll think or pray on, like, how can I say this in a way that if a person from the left is watching, that they hear what I'm saying. I hope that I did that in this video. I hope it was a pretty concise, like, this is why people care. But let me add one further thing. A final thought about all this is the racial aspect. The powers that be, the elite, the global elite, however you want to phrase it, the corporate, political, and global elite, they benefit by having the masses continually at each other's throats and fighting. And when they do that, then we never hold their feet to the fire. And we never actually, for all of you on the left, if you're watching, all of you leftists who think you're part of some resistance, you're not. You're doing exactly what they want you to do. You go out and you do the protests when they pull your protest string. You pay attention to a murder if they tell you to. If your propaganda machine, the corporate propaganda machine, tells you to. They shape the narrative. They shape the things that you believe. They tell you what to believe. And they keep us from ever uniting and holding their feet to the fire. They did that with COVID. The number one question we should have been asking is, where did this virus come from? And they very effectively shut down that question, didn't they? Who funded it? They shut down that question until much later when no one cared anymore. Then they said, oh, yeah, it probably came from the Wuhan lab. Oh, and by the way, yeah, we were sending money there through the NIH, through EcoHealth Alliance. But, even though Obama had banned gain of function research here, we were still funding it with our tax dollars. But let's not get into that. They shut down that line of questioning for years. How? They pulled on your tribalism strings. They told you right-wingers were doing XYZ. Right-wingers were doing this. And they didn't want to take the vax. And, they lied to you about what that even was. It wasn't a right-left thing. There were a lot of progressives who had their eyes opened during COVID because they were like, wait a minute, we're the ones, like a lot of my friends who are progressives, who I now consider base progressives, they were the ones that were like naturopaths and stuff. They're like, we don't want this. We don't want forced vax. We don't want why are they doing this? We don't want masking kids. They were the ones protesting in a lot of places side by side with libertarians, conservatives, whoever. But because they pulled that string and said, this is a right-left thing, all of you leftists immediately got your marching orders. And then, some of you, even today, I saw a ridiculous video, a bunch of you getting your COVID booster and taking pictures and posting it and saying, suck it, RFK. You think you weren't nudged into doing that? That's what's crazy. They're sharing videos of themselves getting the vax and posting it and going, this is what you get, RFK. I'm getting the vax to show you. You think you're not being nudged to do that? That's what's crazy. You're not part of any resistance. You are doing exactly what they want. And I say all this, and if you're on the right, if you're not part of the woke mob, bear with me, because I have a message for those of us who are not in that cult as well. Here's the message for those in that leftist cult. They have falsely convinced you of a bunch of crazy stuff about race. They convinced you through cherry picking news stories and focusing solely on these stories and blowing them up. A lot of you believe entirely ridiculous things that are not supported by the data. You believe a lot of falsehoods. You believe that there's this epidemic of cops killing unarmed Black people. That's not true. That is factually not true. And oh gosh, what's the guy's name at Harvard? The Black professor who did a study who went into it. Somebody hit me up in the comments with his name. He did this study a few years ago. He thought he was going to do a study about cops shooting unarmed Black people. He did a study. He thought it would show one thing. It showed the exact opposite. And oh boy, the leftists hated him then. Even though he was a liberal, they hated, and he was Black, they hated him then because of that study that came out. They tried to cancel him. But go look up Roland Fryer. Thank you. I knew Roland was in my head, but I couldn't think of his last name. Go and look up that study. Leftists, look up any numbers. Go to the FBI database. It's just not true. There was no epidemic of cops killing unarmed Black people. That's not a thing. But you believe it, don't you? And I've seen man on the street interviews with leftists who they when asked to guess what percentage of Black people are unarmed Black people who are killed by the cops, and they say crazy numbers, nowhere near reality. They believe crazy things because of the media. So what they've done to you is they've instilled you with this false narrative, and they've given you an emotional response attached to that false narrative. And so in around 2017, 2018, there was a whole spate of articles, and I went and looked one of these up the other day. Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example. Oh my gosh, the woke white people love Ta-Nehisi Coates. He did a whole book of an essay to his son. And that sparked a lot of articles at the time. You guys remember these articles in the New York Times and other places where Black people were penning articles and essays, Black woke people, about how they had to have the talk with their kids and tell their little Black kids, their sons, their children, not to play with little white kids. Don't be friends with white kids. Don't trust white people. They have the talk with them and tell them that white people want them dead and things like this. Falsehoods that are not true. Okay, well now here's how the media plays the people who are not in the woke cult. This is the message for people who are on the same page as me about everything else I've said so far. You may have an issue with this, but stick with me. The media controls those of us who are not in the woke cult in a different way by ignoring these stories like this brutal Charlotte murder over and over and over again, where the perpetrator is Black, by ignoring Black on Black crime, by ignoring Black on white murder, the recent Black mob violence that happened at that jazz fest. That was just a few weeks ago. There's these stories that we see that come across social media, right? And because the mainstream corporate media ignores it, it starts to push people who are awake and who are noticing these things and who are noticing that they have a double standard and who are noticing, rightly so, that this is BS. It starts to push a lot of them over to this place of only looking at it through a racial lens instead of looking at it through how the elites are manipulating all of us lens. They primarily will put the racial lens up top. I'm not saying you can't look at this through a racial lens. You should. But they put the racial lens up top. And what I mean by this is, a couple years ago, if this had happened and I'd posted this about this story on social media, almost none of the conservatives in my comments would have said anything racial. Like, they would have noticed that, yeah, they ignored this story because it's a Black perpetrator, because they ignore the much higher percentage of Black murderers. It's a much higher percentage per capita. It's Black men primarily who commit most of the murders in this country, and the media ignores that. They might mention stats like that, but they wouldn't make like racist comments about all Black people. Well, now things have changed a couple years later. People are being pushed to that place. And in my comments, when I talked about this news story, I saw people who I feel like have been nudged in their own way to this place where they're now, I was getting comments that were like, picking something about like free cotton wasn't worth this, bringing them over as slaves wasn't worth all this. And just other things about like, you should make sure you move away from apes, like things like that, just ridiculous stuff. And then a lot of them are now doing the very same thing that the Black woke people were doing. And they're saying, it's time, white people, you need to have the talk with your kids, with your little white kids. And you need to tell them not to be friends with little Black kids. And you need to tell them not to hang around with Black kids and that Black people want to kill them. That's not true. It's not true. And they're nudging you and manipulating you in the same way. And this benefits the global elites in the same way. Because you just keep these two sides, these inaccurate narratives and these two sides fighting so that there's no uniting against the top-down suppression of our liberties, our freedoms. There's no uniting to hold their feet to the fire when it comes to things like Jeffrey Epstein, people, members of the global elite, the political, the media elite, the corporate elite engaging in child prostitution rings. Like, we're not going to hold their feet to the fire on that. Apparently, we didn't hold their feet to the fire on COVID. Like, it's almost like we can never actually, there's never been an actual real hashtag resistance, lefties, because they've got you guys spinning out over here by cherry picking stories to create a false narrative. And then they've got some people, not all, but some people spinning out over here by ignoring stories to create a false narrative. And it's just this seesaw. It's just this seesaw. Okay, now I'm sure there are going to be some people upset with the second part of that. So I'll just look and see what people are saying. Hey, what's up, Randy? Randy gave a super chat for $10. It says, Randy Wallen says, we are in a revolution. You are on your own, and the state not only won't help you, they will look the other way when you're slaughtered. They want you unalived. Race is just a tool in the revolution. Absolutely. On that, we're yes, that's a better way possibly of saying what I was trying to say, which is that they use race. They use it. It's a Trojan horse. They use it by ignoring Black crime, by ignoring that, data on Black crime, by ignoring individual stories like this. If the perpetrator's Black, they use it. They know that's going to inflame people, and they do that on purpose, just like covering George Floyd nonstop and presenting it in a certain way is going to inflame people on the left, and they know that. Andrew Knapp for $5. Thank you, Andrew. He says they also don't talk about Charlotte being a major trafficking hub. I've heard of evidence disappearing from brothel busts that implicated local politicians. Oh, Andrew, I don't know anything about those local stories, the brothel stuff there, but I do not doubt it for a second. I do not doubt it for a second. There's I was watching an interview with Whitney Webb yesterday. I'm not finished with it. I just had it on the background, but she's like a treasure trove of information. She's written a book about the Epstein cover up, and One Nation Under Blackmail, I think is the name of her book. And just, she knows just this grim picture she was painting of the elite. And it was like, anyway, you're just making me think of her interview, Andrew, because she was talking about a lot of that kind of stuff globally, nationally, and beyond. Randy Wong for $5. Thank you, Randy. He says, a Black man trumps a white female Ukrainian for the racist revolutionary left. Yes, actually, one of the reasons I think they would have tried to memory hold this story no matter what, because they don't like the race. The corporate media doesn't like that the perpetrator's Black and the victim's white. They would have tried to memory hold it no matter what. But add to that the fact that she's a Ukrainian refugee, and they've already seeded the left with this other narrative about Ukraine, and they all have the Ukraine flags, and that's one of the strings that they usually pull. And so they certainly don't want to push this story now, because they don't want any of the people on the left empathizing with the Ukrainian refugee in this story, not in this story. Andrew, if it was a white man, they would have blamed Trump and MAGA. Absolutely. Look what they tried to do to Daniel Penny. He was the guy, remember, in the New York subway who subdued a Black offender, Jordan McNeely, who had a long rap sheet, career criminal as well. Subdued in a chokehold, and Jordan ended up dying, and they tried him for murder. They tried to make an example of him. And then you wonder why nobody does anything when attacks like this happen in public, because the state's going to come after you if you try to be a good Samaritan and intervene. If a Daniel Penny had been on this North Carolina train and jumped up and stopped this knife attack somehow, like jumped in the middle and stopped it, and it had resulted in the death of Decarlos Brown, it would be everywhere on the news Friday night. It would have been everywhere by Friday night. And the left would have been calling for that. Whoever did that, if it was a white guy, calling for him to be tried for murder. You know this. We all know this. Randy for $2. YouTube is disallowing 80% of my messages. Wow. Okay. I don't know why, but it's probably a word. They have certain, they have certain censorship on certain words in comments. So I don't know. It's definitely not on our end. We're not censoring your comments, but YouTube does that. This is the world we're in. Hello, welcome to it. It sucks, lefties. Sometimes it sucks. We're used to it, but we're more used to it than you are. Because I know a lot of you personally, and I know a lot of you when I have conversations with you offline in my real life, and you're like, there was censorship during the COVID years. I'm like, where were you? They don't live in the same world that we do, guys. They don't even know. They're like, what? Doctors were censored? Scientists? What do you mean? I don't mean to make fun of you guys, lefties. I'm just saying it's cute. It's cute that you don't know that it never happened to you, or that your online circle is such that you don't know that this was happening. And I have laughed with some of you in person if you're watching about, because I'm like, what? You don't know? Yeah, exactly, bros and bros. Some of them really don't know. Like, it's not that everyone on the left is like devious and evil liars. They're not. A lot of them are just, they're in the cult, they're in the bubble, and a lot of them just don't know things. Power cat Greg, Keri never talks to me. I'm sorry, dude. I owe you a message. I will hit you up. I apologize. Master Shake, low information leftists. Yes. And I have sympathy for them. I mean, I feel for them sometimes more than others. It just depends. Um, but I try to not have just like this reflexively angry attitude towards all leftists, because that's not like conducive to helping them leave or to pulling people out of it, which is my goal. So, okay, I'm going to wrap this one up. I hope that I covered this is a succinct one, and I hope that I covered this in a way that if somebody on the left watches it, they can understand what it is that is frustrating about the media's lack of response to this case, and what's frustrating about um, about the leadership, the democratic leadership of a lot of these large cities. And if you have questions or you have disagreements, feel free to leave them in the chat. Good Grief says no. Oh, that I'm leaving. Oh yeah, I'm working on I told you guys I've been working on this writing project for a couple months now, and I got to go back and work on that some more today. So this was a good succinct one. Sometimes people look at the long, they're like, I'm not going to watch 2 hours, so maybe a leftist will watch it if it's just an hour, right? Thanks, Cerise. Okay, guys, I'll see you on Wednesday. Thanks for being here. If you get a chance, I've already put out a clip of the interview I got to do with Marcus Allen, the FBI whistleblower, and I'm going to be releasing more of those clips today and tomorrow. And as I mentioned before, if you know of a larger platform, an outlet that would be interested in speaking to an FBI whistleblower, send them a clip or send them the full interview, because I think his story needs to get out there, and I would love to see him on other places. And he's one of the most amazing people I've ever had on Deprogrammed. Like, his whole story, what his strength, his integrity, and his message about Christ. And a lot of the mainstream, the corporate media, they don't want to talk to him. He's a Black conservative Catholic and a former Fed who stood up to the Biden administration. They don't want to talk to him. So it would be great if we could help him get on some larger platforms. Okay, that's it. Thank you guys. I'll see you on Wednesday. My brain's not working anymore. Okay, take care.